All right. Good morning, Doug. We're going to do a Q&A from our viewers today. We got a bunch of questions to go through. Now, if you're interested in asking a question of Doug, I would encourage you to join our Telegram group. There's a link in the description to all these videos to the Telegram group. I solicit questions from that group regularly, and then we answer them here, usually on Fridays. So let's go ahead and get started. Doug, someone from Thailand asks, do you think Thailand will be safe from incoming potential war or upcoming potential war?
Thailand is a unique country in many ways. I mean, it's one of the very few places in the world that wasn't colonized, actually. So that's given it certain cultural aspects. Um, but that's not what people think about when they think about Thailand. They think about it as being a mellow, enjoyable place. I mean, it's really one of my favorite countries in the world. I love
Mhm.
the food. I love the culture. I love the women are fantastic. I mean, the weather is great. It's a wonderful place to hang out. But if I was going to live in Thailand, where would I live? I'd probably, because I've been in some really non-touristy areas of the country too. But you're going to wind up one way or another in a place where the tourists go. So you can stay in Bangkok. I mean, it's a mega city. Anything you want there, any kind of anything in Bangkok. Or you can go to one of the islands like Koh Samui, for instance, or a beach resort like Phuket. Or you can go up north into the mountains to, because I lived up there for a couple of months. What the
Chiang
hell's the name of
Mai?
that? Chiang Mai, of
Chiang,
course. Yeah, so it just depends on what you want. You want the beach, you want this, you want that. Um, so
but do you think
yeah,
if there's a
I'm
war,
a
if you think there's a
yeah.
war that breaks out with China, with whatever antagonist there might be, and China, do you think that would, how do you think that would affect Thailand, or would it have an effect on Thailand?
I think there's a lot of rich Chinese that understand the advantages and the benefits and the niceness of Thailand that are buying apartments and kind of staking a claim to the place, one place or another.
Hmm.
So is that good or bad? Well, I think it's probably good. Uh, I'm not sure if the Thais particularly like the Chinese because, but if there's a war, is there going to be a problem? Well, it depends. Here's the thing with Thailand, and it's the same thing with Burma. It's the same thing with all these damn countries. Like in Thailand, you go to the south, and it's a Muslim area. So culturally, it's pretty different from the Buddhist parts of Thailand. Uh, and they have actually sporadic civil war type stuff that goes on
Hmm.
in the deep south. So that's one thing. And if you go to the north, uh, that's where the private armies have always been, where they grow, various illicit substances and so forth. And there are different tribes that don't really want to take orders from Bangkok. So, yeah, most everybody speaks Thai, the language, and reads the script and all that. But that doesn't mean it's, you know, united in a solid kind of way. I think the only answer to the question is, yeah, I think Thailand would be a good choice, except you got to say, if you're a Farang, which is to say a foreigner, you can be really friendly with the Thais and you can have a Thai wife and speak the language, but you're always going to be a Farang. That's all there is to it. You're always going to stand out. It's not like being a foreigner in some place like Argentina or Uruguay or Brazil or the US for that matter, where you fit in and, you know, you're always going to be an outsider there. Is that a
Yeah.
good thing or a bad thing? During a war? Yeah, I don't know. I guess it depends on hard question to answer.
Yeah, it's toss up. I could go either way. Okay.
Yeah.
One of our viewers says from Belgium says we just arrived in Uruguay and they're working on getting their residency set up, and they're wondering what your thoughts are on the local currency. Um, He says, I noticed that the Uruguayan peso is increasing in value. Does Doug think it might be a good idea to have a percentage of your money in Uruguayan pesos? And if so, what percentage?
I'll tell you how little attention I pay to the value of the Uruguayan peso. What's it worth? About 40 to the dollar now?
Yeah, about that. Yep.
You probably don't keep any pay attention to it either.
No, not really.
Probably it's, yeah. Well, look, here's the thing. At the moment, there's a decent human being who is running Uruguay and will for the next several years. And he's, an intelligent, decent guy. He understands that if you destroy the currency, you basically are destroying the country, especially the poor people. He's got kind of an understanding of that. So yeah, but listen, why you can't invest in a paper currency from a third world country? I mean, it kind of washed that concept out of your mind. I mean, it's just a piece of paper that, especially with low interest rates, you're just not going to win. So forget about the Uruguayan peso as an investment. I mean, it's a lot better than the Argentine peso, which is being actively and aggressively destroyed. But no, don't think about the Uruguayan. It's nice that it's kind of stable, though, relative
Well,
to the dollar anyway.
and they have been better, far better about the central bank here about interest rate management. You know, the interest rate currently here is 6.5% central bank pegged rate. So, you know, compared to I mean, it still doesn't keep up with inflation here, but it's
No,
better than the U.S.
it's more reasonable. But you got to remember that Uruguay, Brazil, and Argentina compete with each other for how quickly and terribly they destroy their national currencies. This has been the case since the 1930s in both countries. But Uruguay has had a runaway inflation. I don't know when it was, during the 80s, I guess, where it basically destroyed the peso and then had a new. But it's not nearly as bad as its neighbors. So
It's a race to the bottom everywhere, it seems, in
everywhere.
currencies.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So next question. In trying to understand the current resiliency in U.S. stock market indices, what is the likelihood that we are in von Mises's crack up boom phase right now?
Well, we should have a crack up boom. And that is where all the money that's being created gives the appearance of a real boom because everybody's buying stuff and there's lots of economic activity, but mainly because people are trying to get rid of dollars and get into something that's not going to lose value. So, and people that have lost everything have to work. So, it's chaotic. That's what a crack up boom is. I mean, it might look good on the surface because everybody is buying all the crap that they can. So yeah, we might be entering that. And I suspect we will have a genuine crack up boom in the US before this is over. I think good chance that we're in the early stages of it now. You see with shortages and people trying to buy cars and all kinds of stuff. Well, yeah, quite possible.
You know, kind of somewhat related to that, I saw yesterday or the day before on George Gammon's channel, he had some data point that showed that something like 25% of all luxury purchases in the last year or so were generated from crypto gains. So it was the beneficiaries of cryptocurrency gains were responsible for 25% of all luxury purchases. I thought that was pretty
That's
shocking.
interesting.
Yeah,
That's really quite interesting.
yeah,
Sure, it's very much as if the Federal Reserve deposited $1 million, not just 1,000 or a few hundred or whatever they've been doing, $1 million in everybody's bank account Sunday night. I can absolutely assure you and promise you that by the end of the next week, every Ferrari and Lamborghini dealer would be totally out of inventory. That's what would happen. And in some ways, that's happened with the cryptos. A lot of people just, hey, they got all this money that came out of nowhere. Hey, let's live high off the hog for a while.
exactly.
Now, what
Yep.
happens? What happens if these shit coins? And I guess most of them are shit coins. I mean, like Doggy Coin or Doge. Apparently has zero utility, zero everything. It was completely worthless. market cap $40 billion. Somebody owns it, thinks they're rich. So maybe all those Lamborghinis because the people that are in crypto, they're not Ferrari buyers, they're Lamborghini
Lambo
buyers.
buyers, yeah.
Yeah, the ones with the crazy colors, especially.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen to those cars? Well, half of them are going to be sitting in barns with, birds roosting under the hood, and the other half are going to hit the market. So wait a few years if you want a Lamborghini, which I don't.
I don't either.
I'll take a
Don't either.
Ferrari though.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Ferraris are beautiful. Although I did drive a Lamborghini Huracan on a test on a
Yeah.
track in Southern California, and I was racing all day in a Porsche a GT3, which I like and is great on the track. And then for the last lap, my driving coach, the guy sitting next to me the whole time, was like, "You got to just try the Lamborghini just once." And I'm like, "I don't like Lamborghinis." He's like, "Just try it just once." And so I did, and I got to tell you, it was fantastic. It was
Sweet. Huh?
it was super fun to drive. Super fun to drive. My time
Yeah,
was worse than the Porsche, but
because who owns Lamborghini now? I mean, the ownership of these companies keeps changing. Like Rolls-Royce and Bentley aren't. They used to
I
be
can't keep
close.
up with them.
Now one's owned by BMW and others by VW. And so
Yeah,
who owns Lamborghini now?
I don't even know. I could look it up here. I'm sure some of our viewers know, but who owns?
No, I'm sure it's a very well-engineered car. I mean,
Oh, it was fun to drive. I was surprised. Like, I didn't want to like it. I didn't want to like it,
you,
but
you felt like
I did.
you felt like you were a pimp driving the thing.
I did. I'm like, I hope someone takes a picture of me doing this. I don't want to be seen in it. But anyway, yeah, it was fun. It was actually surprisingly good. So let's see. Let me get to the next question here. Do you see that the U.S. government removing tax status on IRA or Roth accounts, other retirements accounts, in the near future?
Well, of course, they can do anything they want. That's one thing to bear in mind. This concept of a rule of law is, kind of fading into the background. And if the U.S. is in fact taking lessons from the Argentine government with a 20-year lag, they'll eventually confiscate private pensions, which is what the Argentine government did a few years ago, and melded them into the state pension system. They come up with all kinds of ridiculous reasons why this is good and necessary both. So yeah, it's entirely possible, because the important thing to remember here is that the US government and its employees has a life of its own. It's like General Motors, and everything that the US government does has its own interests at heart. It's not we the people. That's ridiculous. It's like GM or any private company. You do what's good for the company. So yeah, if it comes down to a national emergency, sure, they'll confiscate these things. I have all these tax sheltered plans and all this dog shit. I mean, yeah, I don't rely on any of it. I ought to, the thing is that like taking all the money out of them, but then what am I going to do with the money? I don't want anything. I don't need anything. I mean, maybe people just have too much money these days. Maybe we need a decade of grubbing for roots and berries so we can get grounded again,
Well, whether we want it or need it, I think it may be coming, or some version of that where life will be a little harsher at least. It does seem like there's no way out of that.
Some version of that, yes. Well, yeah, I guess what I'd say is, yeah, these things can serve a useful purpose, but don't plan your life around them being part of the cosmic firmament, because they're not.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, sort of related question. Someone, a Canadian person who says they're out of Canada. They're tired of it, and they are selling their home there, which it's kind of a real estate bubble in Toronto. It seems like, and they said we should walk away with about $600,000 from that. He said, which is good for their family and for the future. But the problem with that $600,000, like, worry about putting that in the bank or keeping it in cash. worry about, buying other overpriced assets.
Yeah.
It's, buying the miners or anything else. It's just, having money, as you were just talking about, is actually, I mean, it's better to have money than not have money, but it does create a whole set of problems. And, what do you think when you look at someone having this, $600,000 nest egg that just came in from this real estate that they have? Where's the least risky thing someone could do with it? Is it buying property, he says land in Nicaragua or Mexico, or, buying the miners, or, keeping it in cash, buying silver? Well, what do you think?
That's never, ever been an easy question to answer. But I think it was a much easier question to answer during times that were more stable. Listen, maybe it's just a bent worldview on my part, but I see these times we're living in as being potentially chaotic and very unstable. If you ask that question most of any time during American history, you can come up with reasonable alternatives. But I understand why you're in a quandary.
Yeah.
And I don't want to give any advice on that because it might be the wrong advice. And then I'd get blamed. On the other hand, if it's the right advice, the
You wouldn't
person
get any
takes,
credit.
yeah, and the person that takes it's a genius. And so you just can't win. But
Yeah.
one thing I do is buy a few gold and silver coins, quite a few silver coins at this point, because I think silver is actually pretty cheap. But buy
Yeah.
them because you can have them in your own hand, your own possession. But then you got to figure out where you want to live, where in the U.S. or where in the world, for that matter. And the answer is constantly changing because the colors of the map on the wall are always running, sociologically, if not politically. So I'd like to be more helpful. Maybe it's helpful just to acknowledge the fact that it's really a problem.
It really is. It just seems like it can't be all in on any one thing at this stage. It seems like you have to hedge. You have to hedge your bets, and so that no one thing can cause ruin on your part. Like, you can't have it all in your bank where there could be a bail-in and you lose it, or in cash where it just gets, inflated to zero. But
Yeah, and it
you gotta
depends
screw it up.
also what you want to do with your life. I mean, what do you do for a living? Which may have a lot to do with where you want to live or have to live, too.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't
How
live
about
in a big city at this point, though. I think that'd be a mistake. I'd want to live in a pleasant, small town, someplace, if that suits.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, well, just, what I having this same problem with, extra cash and not knowing what to do with it. What I did is I bought a farm, and I bought a farm mostly as a lifestyle choice is a big part of it, but also I figured, like, it's productive. It can feed me and it can provide entertainment and uh, usefulness for me and my family. So, like, and it wouldn't matter what happened with the currency. It wouldn't matter what happened with the stock market. So, that's one of the ways I hedge. But of course, it's not all of my assets are not concentrated in one thing.
Yeah. Well, I've got a farm too.
You have a
And
lot of them.
yeah, and they're basically a pain in the ass. So
They
if
are.
you're somebody like Joel Salatin and you know what you're doing, you really like it, perfect. But, you know, no easy answers.
Yeah. Okay. Doug, what did you really think about Marin Katusa's book, The Rise of America, specifically his belief on MMT as a viable future policy?
I know. Listen, I love Marin. I really like him personally. And as an investment guy, he really is something of a genius. And he really does know how to analyze companies and dig down. And he's got street smarts and he's got technical smarts. So, okay, personally and professionally, I love Marin. But his endorsement of MMT, he's going to wind up eating his words with the fork and spoon, and he's going to be sorry he ever said that. Because when it comes to economics, that's not his strong suit. And it's called The Rise of America, too. And I understand why he said that, basically because the rest of the world is in such deep shit. He thinks that, at least if I understand what's going on in that book, which I have problems with the way it's written, too. But sure, the US is, and I don't like to call it America anyway, because it's not America anymore, it's the US. But yeah, I guess it's going to do okay relative to really bad places. Probably better than Canada. But the answer to the question is follow Marin's investment advice. Don't listen to his economic reasoning. They're two different things.
Okay. All right. So someone says, I want to open a gun store in California. Or is that just asking for trouble, more trouble than it's worth?
Listen, I had an FFL for years, and during the years that I had, it's a federal firearms license that allows you to sell guns commercially, buy and sell guns commercially. And every year, it became more and more of an aggravation and a nuisance until I finally just gave it up. It wasn't, the advantages of having it weren't worth the disadvantages of having it. And that was years ago. And now you've got, there's some total maniac that Biden's appointed to be head of the
ATF.
Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Crazy that they loop these things together, the three things you need for, a good party or a good camping expedition. Crazy. These people are insane. But they've got a genuine Bolshevik running it. So no, I think it's a bad idea. And I don't think there's any money in it besides. So better places to deploy your time and money, in my opinion.
Yeah, you might be better. I mean, if you really want to be in
California.
I know that is just asking for trouble, I think, man.
Yeah, I think why ask for trouble? There's plenty of it.
There's enough of it. Exactly. All right. Next question. Someone from Canada asked, should working class families relocate from Western countries to escape authoritarianism? I am in Canada and have been strongly considering it. My great-grandfather left Ireland to settle in Rhodesia. My grandfather and grandmother emigrated to Canada after the Second World War. The details of the story are so fascinating, but I don't think that there's the same opportunities as they had. But as you've said before, as your ancestors. I don't know what that quote is, but what do you think about that? About people, especially working class people, relocating from Western countries?
Yeah, where are you going to go? Well, to start with, depending on your age and your skill set and a number of other things like that, for many years past, I've suggested to North Americans and Europeans that they go to Africa for lots of reasons. But they're not as valid now as they used to be because international travel is much harder than it used to be. And in the future, transferring funds across borders is only going to get harder unless you use Bitcoin. They're going to try to make that harder too. So we're going into a time when your spectrum of opportunities is not as broad as it used to be. So where do you go? And I don't know. Listen, Matt, you've transplanted to Uruguay. Where have any second thoughts about it? Any other place that you're thinking, maybe I should go there too, or instead of?
I mean, I think the state of the world today, I think the best choices really were to, I think there's potentially some places in Mexico that could be good, but I think that can get incredibly chaotic very quickly because of its dependence on the US and, there's just the potential for violence there. Large population. So, I mean, I think Mexico I considered, and I think there are some places in the US that'll be better than other places. And I don't necessarily believe reflexively that Florida would be a winner or something like that. But it is sort of home territory, at least for me. But I feel very good about my decision to come here. I mean, I think that this place is a peaceful place where people do not like conflict. They're easygoing. They're not particularly ambitious or anything, because there are downsides to it. The bureaucracy sucks, all of that. I mean, it wouldn't be a place if I were trying to make my fortune. This wouldn't be the place to come. No
No,
doubt about it. It wouldn't
no.
work. But at my stage in life, it is. I think it's a great place to be. It feels very neutral with all the chaos in the world. It has this, they have stupid rules here and all that stuff too, but it seems more neutral than other places.
Yeah, I agree. I guess that's one reason I wound up here uh, in Uruguay. Also, after putting a lot of time and effort in Argentina, which is more fun and more interesting than Uruguay, no doubt about that. But I don't know, where do you go? I mean, if I rewrote that book, The International Man, today, it would have to be a totally different book. I mean, the world has changed in the last 50 years. It really
Yeah.
has, in all
Well,
kinds of ways.
and I really think it matters, like the stage of life you're in, because if you're really trying to get, a grub stake together, you're trying to really generate capital and resources, then that is totally different than the other things. Then you're just trying to, uh, avoid the greatest, the biggest areas of government overreach, or potential spillover from war zones or whatever might happen. So
Yeah, and if you don't have any capital, you almost certainly want to go to a city for lots of reasons to get that capital put together. But if you have capital, you want to be in a, I don't think you want to be in a city. You want to be in the countryside, at least the way I see it. And you do too, I know.
yeah.
So but where do you go today? Huh. I mean, you'd have to, this is the problem is that when you ask a question like that, that's good. I ask people that question myself. Well, where would you go? I ask other people to learn something, but frankly, you have to get on a plane and go to lots of places and get off the plane and wander around and assess things firsthand, boots on the ground. But that's harder today than it used to be in lots of ways. So that's the way you answer the question, but it's harder to answer that question these days than it used to be. Of course, you can watch videos that people post from all over the world as a start,
No,
but
and those are helpful. They're helpful, but there's nothing like, you know, getting into a place and interacting with the locals. One of those words we're not supposed to use, as you recall.
yeah, or God forbid they're primitives, but you're probably
Exactly.
not going to want to go to a place where they're primitives. Although, frankly, I, for a while, uh, I thought I might move to the New Hebrides.
Hmm.
And this was a long time ago. This was in the 70s, okay? When the northern half, or northern section, not the half really, of the New Hebrides, which is now called Vanuatu, was trying to split off from the rest of Vanuatu. And so I spent a lot of time and got mildly involved in their revolutionary movement and all kinds of stuff. And this is a country where they have the people that jump from towers with vines
Bungee
surround them.
jumpers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the bungee jumpers and the big Nambas and the small Nambas and the John Frum cult. This is a crazy place. But on the other hand, it's where when James Michener wrote his book Tales of the South Pacific, he wrote it from there because that's where he was during World War II.
Hmm.
A good part of it, I guess. So it had a certain attraction, you know. And even to this day, I wonder what happened to that giant ranch down there that I could have bought. I've mentioned it here. What
Yeah.
was it? 10,000 hectares 10,000 head of cows, enough construction equipment to build a city because the Americans left it there after, of course, most of it was probably junk now. And what else? Cocoa plantation, copra plantation, coffee plantation, all this stuff. Plus the, I could have bought that for a leasehold. But this is Indian country, a couple of $1 million. But then I'd be stuck on an island. And if it's hard running a farm here in Uruguay, running a plantation in Vanuatu would have been really, really hard. Hey, it would have been a good experience. It's like that castle on the Mozambique border in Rhodesia, which I could have bought for, I think it was $80,000. And that would have been a good speculation. But it would have been a whole different life path,
Yeah.
So I don't know. These are cosmic questions that are unanswerable. Yeah, here's what I've always done. Go on a walk down the road, and when I come to a fork in the road, I take it. I always like that Kurosawa movie. I think it was called Yojimbo, where the samurai is walking down the road. That's just what he does. He arbitrarily goes right instead of left, and then the adventure starts. So I see life like that. I don't plan things out.
But you do have to be moving for these things, for this serendipity to happen. You have to be out there in the world in some way.
You're right. You're right. You've got to be moving. If you sit someplace like a house plant, it's almost guaranteed nothing will happen until somebody comes along and eats you. That's what happens to plants.
Exactly. All right, Doug, have you ever heard of the fourth political theory developed by the Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin?
I'm familiar with him. Is
Okay.
there an explanation there?
No, they don't provide one. They don't provide one. I've read some of his stuff, and it's fairly complex. So I don't think I don't know it well enough to summarize it easily for us. So whoever asked that, if you want to maybe point out a specific part of that you'd like us to respond to, I think we could do that. So the next question is, will the price continue to rally for fertilizers, especially potash, in 2022?
Well, the two main fertilizers that big-time farmers or small-time farmers use, although Joel Salatin wouldn't use either one of them, are ammonia products for the nitrogen and potash. And they both about tripled or quadrupled in the last year or so. So are they going to keep going up? I hate to buy commodities that have tripled or quadrupled. Because what happens is usage goes down and production eventually goes up, and it's the commodity cycle. So look, listen, maybe they're going to double or triple again in real terms, which is all that counts. But I'm not interested in them. I mean, when I trade commodities, and I do actively, it's, I'm looking for tops and bottoms or a definite trend in motion. But buying something after it's already tripled in a short period of time, I don't know. I'd want to go short, except this isn't the environment yet to go short commodities. So my answer is forget about it.
Okay.
But I could be wrong.
Could be, but the risk reward ratio is not exactly in your favor at this point, right? That's your point?
No, and if you're not if you're not really familiar with big time agriculture, where you're going to be buying tons of ammonia products and potash, you shouldn't get involved as a speculator, because you're going to be prey, not a predator.
Right. Okay. Doug, would you accept a microchip under your skin if you were forced to, is what it says? Would you accept it if you were forced to, is the question.
What are the chances that the Wild Bunch, that's my favorite movie, incidentally, everybody ought to watch it once a year probably. What are the chances that the Wild Bunch would have taken a a chip under their skin if that's what the Mexican army wanted them to do. I'd say the chances are slim and none, and Slim's out of town.
Yeah. Good answer. Okay. Let's see. Somebody says, if I'm planning to move to Uruguay, should I rent first or buy a property?
You gotta rent because you gotta get to know the country. I mean, we're in the country. It's a little country, but you know, if you're gonna drive around there, it's actually pretty big.
Yeah.
So yeah. In fact, to start out with, live in lots of hotels and Airbnbs and stuff like that, and then rent a place, and only then think about buying if you can find a decent real estate agent, which exists, but you know, it's a very illiquid kind of market here, very crazy
Right.
kind of market.
So if you buy something, you can end up holding it for a long time here. It's not like it's not like some of the U.S. markets.
Exactly. If you're going to buy something in Uruguay, or for that matter, almost any place in South America that I'm familiar with, the only way to buy, really, I think, in retrospect, there's special situations, obviously, but buy it in a bankruptcy or when the person dies and family wants to sell it or something like that. That's how you buy stuff, because you make your money when you buy it, not when you sell it. Because these things are hard to sell. I mean, so you got to buy them right. Okay, so plan on living in a hotel for lots of different hotels for a month, then maybe rent a place and then buy a place. Forget about buying it without first. That's crazy.
Yeah. Okay, next question. I've heard other economists discussing Federal Reserve balance sheet expansion and how it's not inflationary because the cash stays only with the Federal Reserve and commercial banks, or something to that effect. So basically, what my question is to Doug, does he think central bank balance sheet expansion could facilitate in any way commercial bank COMEX activity? My thought is that people who say central bank balance sheet expansion is not inflationary because it is contained to the Fed and commercial banks. But he said, what's to stop JP Morgan from intentionally losing $1 billion on COMEX, trying to smash the price, and then the Fed just quietly making them whole?
Yes. Well, this is one of the problems with central banking to start with. I mean, they can create all this money, and then where's the money go? And who gets it first? And then how do they deploy it? Because it's just money created out of nowhere, but people accept it. So one reason to look forward to a chaotic environment in the future. But look, when the Federal Reserve buys government bonds, which is mainly what they buy, although it's not all that they buy, they do it by crediting somebody, the federal government usually, their account at commercial banks with dollars, which are created out of thin air. Okay, so now what happens with that money? Okay, where's the government going to allocate it or transfer it to? It's kind of a neutral. It's a criminal activity, but they've assigned a neutral term, transfer. That sounds, normal, reasonable to transfer something. We do it all the time. It's a criminal activity.
Yeah.
So look, I think it's important when you're thinking about economics, think about reality as opposed to the kind of crap that you hear on CNN when they have a talking head describe artificial reality, actually. Not much of an answer, but I don't want to get into an abstruse discussion of Fed policy.
No. Okay. What do you think of Robert Kiyosaki's 5Gs? These are basically 5 assets classes that he said you really need to acquire. It says one is gold, silver. The second one is grub. The third one is gas/energy. The fourth one is ground. And the fifth one is guns. So he wants to know if there's anything you would add to that list or alter, and what priority you would put on those different categories of things.
Well, I like Robert a lot. He's a sound, commonsensical, boots on the ground type of thinker, And those 5Gs sound really practical and good to me. So I think they're great. Anything I'd add to that? Well, it depends on how much money you're dealing with, and it depends on your personal psychology. But I would say that you have to try to develop the skills of a speculator in the years to come and hope that once this decade is over, you can discard those speculative skills, because if we have a stable economy, they're pretty useless. But so I'd add 5Gs. Oh, five Gs, S.
Yeah,
So speculate, little S after the G.
that's a great point. That's a really good point.
That's a good point. Maybe if Robert's listening to this, he'll figure that that might be kind of a fun meme.
Yeah, add the S to the side of it. Yes, exactly. That's good because that is what's missing. It's basically these are the necessary items to ensure, basic survival, I think, but to thrive in an environment so out of control like what we live in, you got to have that speculation component to really get ahead, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
So 5G sounds very good to me. G's. Well, yes. I like that. Okay.
All right. Let's see. Another Canadian. I'm a 27-year-old Canadian escapee who's in Mexico now, starting his own small private fund with some friends. I'm wondering Doug's thoughts on the Channel Islands being a bolt hole and whether a small farm or property in Nicaragua, or rural Mexico is something advisable.
Well, problem with these places, especially in Central America, but all through Latin America, is that it's the land of the Frito Bandito, where things can change radically with the next election. So, yeah, I think it's fine. But, some of these countries have in fact, all these countries have very different cultures from the other countries. So talking about Latin America, well, okay, one thing you can say, yeah, kind of a Spanish culture where the conquistadors got them off on the wrong foot, and they've stayed on the wrong foot since then. So they're similar in that respect. And except for Brazil, they all speak Spanish, so it's similar that way. But otherwise, these countries down here are pretty different from each other in lots of ways. So might be a good idea. I don't know.
Okay. Doug, what's your opinion of deeply discounted collectibles such as art?
Well, I've collected art. It's look, the art world, as far as I'm concerned, is basically an area for laundering money if you're really wealthy and running scams on naive people. And so I followed the art world, and it's, I don't understand it because it's Pareto's law on steroids, where one variety of Pareto's law is 80% of everything is crap, but then you take 80% of the 80% that's crap, and it's really crap, and then in the art world, go to the next standard deviation, and it's going to be much more expensive and much crappier. So, look, there are people that have just killed it in the art world. They just made lots of money. But what I do when I buy something that I like and I enjoy looking at. Kind of end of the story. I don't think you can invest in art, frankly.
Okay.
It's a greater fool theory, or, maybe. Anyway, the thing is with most art, like I remember there was one, it was a Monet picture that, long story, a friend of mine had this picture, and it was supposed to be the missing picture of a quartet of scenes of a bridge in 4 different scenes. One was missing, and so this was supposed to, was it worth $50 million? Or was it a really well done knockoff? Well, we got opinions, and the opinion said, no, it's a knockoff. But who the hell knows? They don't know. It depends on how clever you can duplicate these things. When it comes to art, I'm of the opinion a difference that makes no difference is no difference. Like, for instance, I'd love to have some. Oh, there's so many artists that I do like their stuff, but
Bosch.
yes, that's one. Absolutely, kind of my yeah. Loved. I'd love to have some Hieronymus Bosch originals, but you know, you're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars to get one. So I've been thinking, you know what I ought to do? I ought to just go to an art school in North Vietnam, which is where most of this stuff happens, and tell them, look, I want you to replicate this thing, and they will. They'll make it perfect with modern materials and all that, of course, because it's not going to cost a lot of money. And they don't make it the same size, so they can't be accused of trying to knock it off and defraud somebody. And I hang it on my wall because it's fun to look at. So I'm sorry if I sound very déclassé saying something like that. That's the way I feel about it.
All right, good. Next question is, has Doug ever slapped another man in order to challenge him to a duel?
No, I haven't been in a fight since I was in high school. And especially now, when I recognize that, you know, unless I'm fighting somebody who's, the same age, fighting doesn't look too good to me. So the answer to that question is no. I mean, I really like to avoid physical violence because anything can happen. I mean, anything can happen. You win the fight, maybe you're going to get a lawsuit, or maybe the guy's going to call the cops and have you arrested. That's a good reason not to get in a fight, okay? Or maybe you're going to lose the fight, in which case you could be severely damaged. So, there's all kinds of reasons not to get in a fight. It's kind of unseemly, to,
Yeah.
I mean,
What about, has there ever been like because he was asking about a duel. I wonder if has there ever been somebody who you felt like, personally, substantially slighted you that,
oh, they're
you
like
at
to
least,
kill?
yeah.
Well, yeah, okay. I haven't dealt with that in the novels, the idea of dueling. Uh, I think dueling is trouble with dueling is that if you're going to be a successful duelist, you got to spend a lot of time practicing to be competent, whether it's with a sword or a pistol or an axe or a Bowie knife, maybe where you each tie your left wrist together, and they used to
Yeah.
do that
Yeah.
in the US. So not really very appealing, but I guess if I was going to duel somebody, I'd want to go for a handgun duel because uh, I'm much better with handguns than other weapons, and it's neat and clean. Nothing wrong with dueling. Listen,
No.
you ought to be able to do anything you want. Uh, quite frankly, there should be a law against this type of thing. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh yeah,
How
I
would you
definitely,
handle it?
yeah, I think dueling, it did create a simple resolution to circumstances that, if people are, volunteering to be part of it, it seems like it makes sense. And, otherwise if you have these deep grudges between people who lived in close quarters with one another, where there's families are intertwined, and this is the way you could resolve it and set it aside, once and for all. So I think they definitely served a purpose. I think they didn't come into popularity by accident. I think they
No.
must have served a societal benefit, or else they wouldn't have existed.
Well, and not only that, but if you know you could be challenged to a duel, uh, you're going to tend to be much more careful about what you say and who you say it to. It'll tend to be a politer society for that reason, because you can,
Exactly. Yep.
yeah, I mean, don't want to engage in one because is there anybody that I really want to kill that badly? Uh, no, I'd say not. I mean, no, not really.
No. No.
Maybe they will be. I mean, I don't know. Should be able to do it though. Yeah, dueling.
Yeah.
Interesting and
Yeah.
probably a very good idea.
So next question is, and I don't know if you know anything about this, but someone says, does Doug think there is a treasure on Oak Island? If so, who buried it and what could it be? I don't know anything about that.
Oh, well, I was involved in treasure hunting for a while when I was an avid scuba diver, and I'm not anymore. But okay, so what's the Oak Island story? It's on the East Coast, or buried pirate treasure, 100 feet deep. People have been looking for it for decades and decades, and I have no idea. I've heard all the stories. I've heard the stories about Japanese gold in the Philippines. Uh, when I was treasure hunting, uh, which was a crazy story. I mean, we didn't rent it. We had a World War II minesweeper like the one Jacques Cousteau used, except our minesweeper looked like a target drone, not like Jacques Cousteau's. And, we were first going to dig up Civil War blockade runners off the harbor of Charleston. Okay, I actually got on one, but this thing was not well organized. And then we were going to go down to the Quito Sueño banks off of Colombia and look for Spanish treasure. This is the kind of thing that only somebody that's a teenager or in their 20s would do. So I did that for 3 months. And yeah, treasure hunting. I met Mel Fisher and all kinds of people involved, strange people involved in the treasure hunting world. But hey, great adventure, okay?
Yeah. Well, I think this is one of those examples of, that, you got to be in motion and then the forks sort of emerge and opportunities arise and some of them turn into nothing but great stories, but you got to be in motion and doing stuff in order for your life to have any kind of adventure to it.
Anyway, if you find the treasure, I promise you that the local tax authorities and 100 different local government agencies, I don't care where you are going to be all over you. So, forget about it.
All right. Someone says, let's see, with the COVID hysteria going away now, the US government needs a new excuse to crank up the printing press, and is deliberately trying to instigate conflict with Putin involving also the NATO states. Right? He says, would you agree with that idea that they may be using that as a excuse to continue the money printing fiasco to keep the economy going longer?
Yeah, of course. If it's not, it's like Gilda Radner used to say. What did she say exactly? She says, if it's not one thing, it's something else. It's always something. So of course they will.
Is there something else besides this conflict in Ukraine with Russia that that comes to mind as like something they may rely on as an excuse to keep the game going longer?
I don't believe. I'd be willing to take a money bet that if the Russians, this is a long story, people aren't going to want to hear about it, but there's not going to be a major war in the Ukraine unless the US foments one. Frankly, that's what I think. And anyway, Crimea does belong to Russia. Not that I believe in nation states or nation states owning stuff, but if you think in those terms, it belongs to Russia, and the Donbass, is full of Russians and should be an independent country so that there's a buffer between Russia and, Ukraine, who the Americans idiotically are trying to make part of NATO, which ought to be abolished and should have been abolished 30 years ago. So I don't know if that's an answer or not, but it's not one thing, it's something else. It's always something.
What's your opinion of the Gulf countries, Qatar and Bahrain and UAE? Specifically, he's wondering if the likelihood that they will be immersed in war over the resources over the next 20 years, if they're a good place to live, a good place to invest. What do you think?
Interesting. What's happened to Dubai? The first time I went to Dubai, I didn't even leave the airport because the airport was a tiny little shithole airport about the size of the one in Aspen, Colorado. which I was eventually heading to. And that was Dubai in those days. There was nothing there. I mean, there was nothing. You can look at the pictures of what it looked like back in then. It was 1980, late 70s, something like that. It was desert. And now the place is mind-boggling. So incredible story, Dubai. And they don't have oil or anything. That's Abu Dhabi, which is an hour drive to the north, I think, that has all the oil. But anyway, Qatar, been there. It's way too Muslim, way too Arab culturally. No real international community. You want to go to Dubai if you want to go to that part of the world. But so, is it a good place to be? God, I can think of so many scenarios where it could be great and better, or collapse back into the desert. Don't know. That's a prediction I'm not sure I want to make.
Okay. All right. So this guy's asking a question about bribery and kind of a philosophical question, I guess, around anarcho-capitalism. He says, in bribery, both parties benefit from bribe. One gets efficiency, the other gains financially. However, when this becomes so entrenched in society that nothing can get done without it, and everyone expects one for every little thing that society, in its dysfunction is to get anything done. Let's see, he says, how does one reconcile the free market nature of a bribe, where both parties agree, with the clearly negative effects that it has on a society when there is, quote, too much of it?
Well, that's a very good question. And I wrote, I think, a very cogent essay on bribery in the book, Totally Incorrect. And you'd like that essay. But in brief, let's divide bribery into two areas. One is if you're dealing with the government, which is a coercive institution and, is making all kinds of laws that are prohibiting free action. It's good to bribe, and if you're a government official, to accept the bribe, although you're betraying your employer. But your employer is a criminal organization. So I really don't have too much trouble at all with, in fact, I encourage government employees to take bribes and people to solve their problems but it's destructive of the fabric of culture to have to do that. The part of bribery that I don't approve of under any circumstances, if somebody is working for a company as an employee, and bribery in that case becomes theft from your employer directly. And that's just immoral. So I'd say stealing from the government, we can argue about, is the government legitimate and where's the money come from and all kinds of things. But bribery in the case of an employee of a productive enterprise, big no-no, should be prosecuted. It's a betrayal of trust. When we're talking about government, feeling the way I do about the necessity of government, i.e. none, bribery serves a useful purpose. So that's it in a real nutshell. I don't know if that's clear or not.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has clear concept, like it does, has negative societal effects, but those are actually, if it is the only way society can function because of the structures the government requires people to operate under, it's hard to see it as unethical, right? I mean, it's like it's the only way anything can be done to survive in a completely corrupt, unethical environment.
Exactly. And actually, bribery is only really a problem in highly politicized societies to start with. Where government can't, I'm trying to think of examples and counterexamples, but society becomes corrupt. Tacitus said, the more numerous the laws, the more corrupt the society. And it's been that way since day one. So if you don't want a corrupt society where people don't even think about bribery, then you need a lot less laws. And of course, I believe there are only two. Do all you say you're going to do, and don't aggress against other people or their property.
Great. Okay. What's your take on the super quick uh, removal of all of these COVID restrictions all of a sudden? He says in the UK in particular, but certainly this isn't, or she says in the UK, but also it's not exclusive to the UK. The about face that's happened so suddenly.
Yeah. Well, I think the people, all except the most stupid people, have seen that this is a question of the what was that fairy tale, the king with no clothes, or
Oh, the emperor with yeah, emperor has no clothes.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly. This was a gigantic scam. I mean, I think the consequences as this is unmasked, and I think it will be, uh, and it could be a number of different ways, but it will be over the years to come. It's going to be one of the great scandals of world history.
Yeah.
Absolutely one of the great ones.
Well, and that's kind of, in a way, like obviously I love all this stuff, I love the about face that's happened, but the inertia, once you recognize, I guess, that what has happened, like people are not going to be satisfied with simply not wearing masks anymore. They're going to want to, they're going to, with people who are, have injuries from the medicine or whatever, they're going to want justice of some kind. And you
Yeah,
just wonder how far that goes and what the powers that be response will be in trying to prevent that.
you're absolutely right. I mean, will it go as far as trying to hang Fauci by his heels from a lamppost? Uh, Maybe. Could it break down into a civil war because these people actually hate each other? It's like they've they've been they're displaying their colors now. We can see anything could happen. I mean, they've kind of let the cat out of the bag, perhaps with this, and maybe these idiots will try to come back with COVID 2.0. I mean, hard to predict.
It's hard to predict, but it's good to see it, but at the same time, it doesn't feel less dangerous to me. Sorry, my camera died. I'll just turn my camera off, Doug, when you finish. But it doesn't seem less dangerous to me what's happening. So we'll just have to
Oh,
see what happens. But let's see. Just a couple more questions. We'll wrap up. Let's see. Someone says, well, that's not a very interesting question. I'll skip that one. Uh, Someone asks, let's see, what's your opinion about, they're very into physical gold and silver, have a good thing in a crisis, but they are curious about your opinion of physical diamonds.
bad idea, I think, for a number of reasons. One reason is that for at least 10, 50, maybe it's 20 years now, it's been possible to create diamonds in the lab that are totally and absolutely flawless, which oddly enough is why they're not worth very much because they can be created cheaply and they're flawless. And people say, oh, totally flawless diamond, artificial, don't want it. Well, so they want a natural diamond. I don't understand. This is like getting back to that question on artwork. It's, pretty is as pretty does. So it makes no sense. And I think the long-term trend for crystalline carbon, uh, notwithstanding the fact I'm a huge fan of nanotechnology, is down, like heading towards zero. And it's an expert's market anyway. Unless you're an expert, if you're asking the question, you absolutely shouldn't be involved in diamonds. Forget about it.
Great point. Okay. Let's see. It's a 23-year-old Italian guy. Says, I volunteered in Germany. I worked in Norway. I also lived 4 years and got a bachelor degree in Russia. Now completing a master degree in cybersecurity in the Netherlands. I've also always worked many different jobs while studying, like sales, language teacher, dentist assistant, to name a few. So my question is, how can I deal with my fear of not being successful in my 30s? I am haunted by the insecurity of not achieving financial stability and freedom. I come from a middle low income family.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And actually, I remember confronting that myself. What am I going to do? What if, you know, I don't want to be a cubicle dweller. Yeah, of course, this can come up. What should you do? Something specific. Um, you know what? It's too bad they don't have yellow pages anymore because they were very convenient. Just pick wherever it is that you live, or the large city in Holland or whatever country you might be in. And it sounds like you can speak several languages reasonably well. I just, in effect, go through the yellow pages or computer equivalent of them and find a business that you're interested in and call up the small business where you could talk to the entrepreneur. You don't want to talk to managers, they're a waste of time. And sit down and talk to him and see what he needs and wants and figure out how you can provide that need or want for him. So that's good in a number of ways. It'll help you by looking at hundreds of different businesses, what you're interested in, what you can really do. When you go out and start interviewing people, you should interview scores and scores of people. You'll meet lots of people that you don't know what. So that's what I would do. I would spend your time doing that. Am I being clear with what I'm talking about?
I think so. Let me. I have a slightly different version of that, but I think might help context wise. What I try to do in my 20s is I tried to find people that I was impressed by, people who are older than me and much more successful than me, because I was not successful at all in my 20s. Who I admired and I thought I had a lot to learn from, and then I tried to. Basically apprentice myself to them. Like, what can I do to help you be more successful? Essentially what you're talking about with, finding a company and, the yellow pages that you're interested in. I started with looking for men who I was impressed by, who I thought were doing some interesting things. Like, I think and most of the people who are my friends now are all people who I have great admiration for because under that same model, they're people who I'm impressed by and I learn from their example. Not that I want to copy everything that they do, but I think of people like Porter. Like Porter is a force of nature. I love being around people like that, and there's a lot to learn from. So if you find people who are remarkable, who impress you, and try to find a way that you can create value for them, you learn a lot. You build great relationships, and you get exposure to opportunities, frankly, that you wouldn't get by standing in line and going through an interview process, or trying to climb some professional ladder somewhere. So that's how I did it in my 20s. But
Totally agree. Yeah, we're talking about two similar but different paths up the mountain, of which there are many. But yeah, and it sounds like the guy who wrote that question is in an excellent position. He's already been around the block a few times, and yeah,
yep.
absolutely, that's what he should do. Questioner, if you're listening to this and you actually do that, spend a few months doing exactly what we're talking about, we'd love to hear about it. I'm very confident you'll be successful in it.
Yeah, love to hear more. And you can, the easiest way is to get a hold of us is through Telegram. So you can contact us there. Now, the other thing I'll say that just seems as a baseline for all of it is that you have to save as much money as you can along the way. I mean, I think that, a lot of times this is the mistake a lot of people make in their 20s is that they, as their income goes up, they increase their expenses. And then they also, by doing that, they decrease their flexibility. And you totally eliminate your options. And financial freedom can be achieved if you're concerned about financial stability and freedom. Obviously, high income is helpful, but high income is not sufficient to being financially free. You must save a lot of the money that you earn. You have to save it. You have to keep those expenses very low in your 20s. It really matters.
That's right. And the people that you're looking to associate with will naturally ask themselves or find out, why doesn't this guy have any money? It looks like he's got a fatal psychological flaw if he doesn't have any capital.
That's right. That's right. Okay. All right. I think we'll leave it there for today, Doug. Actually, no, one last question.
Well, we've got to recommend Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad at this point, I think. which is
I think,
kind of
yeah,
speaks to me.
yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I agree 100%. Everybody should read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. What do you think about one more question, Doug? Someone asks what your favorite classics and literary works of the Western canon are.
Mhm.
There are a couple that come to mind.
Yeah, nobody, the best written stuff I can think of, and one of the problems, it depends on translation. If it's a glitchy, stilted, poor translation, it's a terrible read. So that's the first thing. And there are lots of different translations of all of these authors. Um, so that's one thing. I don't want to go off on a tangent because it's not answering the question. But Dante's Inferno, which is really an interesting book to read. And I had two translations, and one was much better than the other. And I read them both when I was a senior in high school. But which canto was this? So at the end of one of it, Dante is going from one Bolgia level to the other. And Dante ends up by saying, speaking of the devil that bids them farewell, and he made a bugle of his butt. And the other translation says, and he made a trumpet of his ass, referring to what the devil did. So things like that stick with you with these different translations. So, okay, getting back to the actual question, which ones? I think my favorite, well, Dante's Inferno is definitely a favorite. The Paradiso and Purgatorio, not very relevant. Too hard to read, I thought. Not. Okay, so Dante, late classical, because it's medieval. The best written stuff is by Plato, but in many ways, it's the most politically unsound stuff, like the Republic. But it's well written, and Aristotle is much sounder philosophically from a method of approaching things. But scholars have determined that Aristotle's stuff, what we have of his is basically lecture notes that his students took. And it reads like notes, kind of, as opposed to students' notes, more than Plato, than the words of Socrates by Plato. It's actually written out and written out, very readably as well. So those are two big favorites of mine. And what else? I know I'm gonna miss something. Let's start there.
Okay.
Nobody
Good.
reads Plato's Republic anymore, and that's actually kind of a base book. Everybody ought to read that, even
Well,
though his political ideas are, really fascistic and stupid, but the book itself is really quite good.
well, do you remember the people that we had lunch with? Some of our viewers, our Uruguayan viewers, we had lunch with them, and they made a interesting and somewhat compelling case for Plato that I hadn't heard before. They were basically arguing that there was a part of it that was misinterpreted, and they were really trying to express well, I can't even articulate their point of view as well as they did, obviously, but they made me a lot more interested in going back and reading some Plato, because I really kind of abandoned it for long ago and never haven't been back.
Yeah, and one advantage of it is that, listen, when people were writing stuff in the 5th century BC, I mean, they weren't distracted by the kind of things we're distracted by. And people of a class that would write these things, basically, they'd sit around and have intelligent discussions all day. So
Right.
I think it's actually quite important. And I forgot, my favorite book, if you want to talk about what classics to read, uh, this is not written by one of the ancients, but I'm a huge fan of Gibbon's Rise or Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And it's not only really well written and an enjoyable read, but it's actually a laugh riot. I mean, he's got such a subtle and urbane wit that, there's not a paragraph that you're not actively amused. So put that on the list.
All right, good. Well, we'll leave it there for now, Doug, and we'll be back next week. So thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Matt.